Hello, everyone. I think this is the day that many of us were really not anticipating coming. And I can tell you from my perspective, I didn't. I truly did not expect that this would be a reality in our world today. But what do you do? This is, whoops, sorry, I've got so much going on here. What do you do? The levels plans have come out. I think everybody is going to be really stinging from this. And I listened to the minister and I listened to our prime minister. And I'll be honest, I wasn't terribly impressed with what they had to say. I would love to see if there was anyone out there who actually felt that this was purely just an immigration decision. So I'm going to start right there with that initial comment. Do you feel that this was purely an immigration decision to reduce the levels to where they're at right now? And of course, what we're talking about right now is the massive cuts on immigration. This is still hot off the press because we've just literally finished listening to the news release, and they have also released the reports, which we will go into. This is as real time as you can get it. We're going to go through it together. I'm going to share my insight. And basically the key takeaway for all of you is what this means for you. What does this mean? Because that's what everyone is asking. I will get to the super chats, absolutely. But at the very beginning, I want to cover at a high level some of the main takeaways that I've been able to pull out as I've been just scouring through these levels plans, trying to make sense of what they're really saying. So we know right now that Minister Miller here just went live with the Prime Minister to announce that they are going to be drastically reducing the number of permanent residents in Canada. But not just permanent residents, temporary residents. The annual levels plans, you guys, have been released, and so you can go in, you can see them. I will make sure that I put the links in the show notes, but if you have not yet had a chance, you can go in to look and see what that data is, as these reports have now been released. Let's see if I can slide over here, and I'm just going to show you so you can pull them up yourself. But these are what I would classify as dark days for immigration in Canada. And it's not that, that I'm an immigration lawyer. I'm looking to line my pocket with more money, and lower numbers mean less business for me. It has nothing to do with that. I have a great platform. I have a small firm. We have very selective clientele. So this isn't something that will impact my practice in any way, shape, or form. You guys will still find me. But the reality is, my heart goes out to all of you individuals out there that were sold a certain opportunity, a certain dream to Canada. And now, as a result of the decisions of Minister Miller and his department and our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, they have put politics ahead of all else. And to not believe that this was a substantial, that politics was not a substantial influence on this is just naive. When you listen to the actual, and you go and you watch on CPAC, and actually I'll pull it up for you guys here. Just let me see if I can pull it up for you here. We should be able to see it. Okay, here. Okay, I'm going to share my screen with you. And I'll pull off of the minister right here, pull him off. So right here, if you want to go watch it, you can go to the CPAC website and you can watch the minister and the Prime Minister discuss these new changes. And I'll be honest, they spent, at least the Prime Minister, spent more time trying to deflect and put, the emphasis on whatever Pierre Poilievre is doing, who he's not even running the government, but they're acting as if he's already won the election pretty much. And the comments that were made and how they completely glossed over the fact that they are royally screwing the vast number of temporary residents in Canada who had hoped and dreamed for an opportunity to become a permanent resident one day. And those changes are massive. So let's just hit on just a few. I'm going to pull them up quick. And then we'll go through and we're actually going to take a look at the levels plans themselves. I am going to get to your questions, you guys. So do not worry about that. I will absolutely get to them. I'm going to just give me 1 second here. I'm going to pull up a little screenshot that I have. Just give me a second. I think this is the one. Let me just see here. Okay. This is the big news here. And this is massive news. It was leaked yesterday, so we knew that this was coming. So for 2025, next year, they're going to reduce the total number of immigrants by over 105,000 people. It's going to be distributed across both the economic and the family class and the refugee and the other classes of immigration. But this is a massive number. In 2026, it's going to be even more, down to 380, and by 2027, 365. So these permanent resident spots are traditionally filled, at least in these more current years, by immigrants, future immigrants that are already here in Canada. So there are fewer and fewer economic immigrants that are going to be coming to Canada basically as a direct permanent resident. The government has said they're going to place greater priority for people that are in Canada, but my goodness, you guys, there is simply not going to be enough spaces. So that's the first thing I want to identify. The second is the reduction in temporary residence. So their goal is to reduce next year the total number of temporary residents admitted to Canada. So the ones that are coming in, by 445,000, pretty much 446,000 in 2025, and another 446,000 pretty much in 2026, primarily across the study permit and the work permit landscape. And then in 2027, they talk about a moderate increase of about 17,400. Well, guys, the only thing you need to pay attention to is 2025, because for all intents and purposes, this is an absolute last-ditch effort by the department and really by the Liberal government to try to stay in power. That's what is happening. And to just say, well, Mark, that's harsh and you shouldn't be saying that. And, oh, you're from Alberta, you're just a conservative. Well, the reality is this is the case. And you can see the public opinion, because of the Liberal policies to this stage, the public opinion and I've said this before, back in 2015 when the Liberals were elected, it was by and large as a result of the Syrian crisis, that humanitarian crisis that occurred in Syria. I still remember the news reports of the young little child that was drowned and washed up on the beach. And that stirred the hearts of Canadians. It caused Canadians to just really want to help, because that's who we are at our core. To be a Canadian is someone who doesn't worry about just yourself, but you look for ways and opportunities to help your neighbor, to give your neighbor a hand up. And then your neighbor is not just the person living on your street, but it's in a global neighborhood. And that's what Canadians, that's what our identity is about. And so the Liberals were able to tap into that in 2015 and said, look, we're going to take 20,000 Syrian refugees. We're going to take 40,000. And it became a really big immigration wedge issue. And in fact, it played a significant role in them getting elected. So the immigration system and the Liberals' policies to this point, up until 2024, have been very, very open and broad. You've seen it. Humanitarian crises, wherever they happen around the world, Canada is one of the first countries to jump in and say, look, we will take your citizens. We will create special measures. You think of how many. Like you take Ukraine alone. I think we've had over 300,000 Ukraine nationals come to Canada, get an open work permit, get a little bit of cash to get them started, and to have an opportunity to come and work here. So 300,000 is a massive number. That's a large portion. Then you look at Hong Kong, you look at Iran, you look at other special measures that, I'm not going to go through all of them, but all of those are outside of what normally was done in the past. And it followed kind of the similar pattern to the Liberal Party's desire to be the country of humanitarian giving, which I 100% support. But the key is it's doing it in a measured and managed way. In like manner, the International Student Program, which all of you have experienced and are very familiar with, ballooned because certain individuals saw an opportunity to make a lot of money, and international studies became a commodity. and students would buy their way in hopes of getting permanent residence. And all students are buying their way in. And I don't mean that in a derogatory tone at all. They pay 3 times what Canadian international students, or what Canadian students pay. And so it is a huge cash outlay with a hope for many of them to be able to stay. Now, because of the public opinion, and we'll go into this, we'll look at this in detail. In particular, we're going to look at the actual way that the Liberal government explains these changes, because there's always spin, always. And so we're going to take a look at this, and we're going to see exactly what their spin is on this. And then I will take that spin and I will unravel it. And I will tell you exactly what is going on. But for international students who've come here, you've seen over this past year, the public sentiment towards immigration in Canada, with an election looming, is now no longer as far to the positive in favor as it used to be. Now that pendulum, or that scale, is starting to flip back the other way. And so if you're losing voters, what does the Liberal Party do? Well, they're going to do everything they can to try to change in the next year, because they've got 1 year to try to get people to forget about all of the decisions that they made previously, and now realize that, hey, we are responsive, we're making changes, and that's what is happening. And it's crazy because, within the party itself, there's a number of the party that are trying to, push for leadership change. And so there's all this turmoil going on within the party. And personally, that's why I believe they made the decision to make this announcement now and not wait to November 1st like they usually do when they release these levels plans. So it's kind of like, hey, look here, don't look here. Politics, toss it out the back, because who cares? For you guys right now, it's all about what this means. Lots of people are posting comments. I will absolutely get to them. And I know people are interested from all over. But if you do have questions, don't hesitate to post them. I will try to get to them. And we can see here, we've got Marco. He says 80% politics, 20% immigration. And what am I going to do for Marco there? I'm going to turn up the sound effect, and I'm going to give Marco one of these. That is the exact case. That is exactly what it is. Okay, let's continue forward here, and we're going to, I'm going to shift my screen over, and we're going to take a look at a few things. So the first thing I want to point out right here, and I think we can get this to the right level, this is the actual 2024 annual report. One of the things that they did very well in this report this year is that in their annex right here, they've created a number of tables and summary items that allow us to jump right to the main issues at play. So they have these that are set up to summarize. And if you look at this right here, you can see how the numbers are planning to be affected for temporary residents. So these are the overall projected TR arrivals and ranges. And so if you look at workers in 2025, these are new people, remember, these are new. So 2025, 673,000. In 2026, they're going to reduce it further. And then in 2027, they're going to bump it up. You can see right here, they always have ranges. And guys, these ranges are significant. So even though they say 673, they still leave the option to go as high as 742. So remember that. They're not locking themselves in. When you look at workers here, you can see the breakdown between these temporary residents. Students are going to stay consistent at about 305, 900, and they can control that, right? They have the ability to say to the schools, we're only going to issue so many allocations to the provinces, and the provinces are only going to issue so many allocations to the schools. But where the variance happens, it's with workers. And look at this, 367, boom, all the way down to 210 and 237. A lot of applications are already in the queue. Work permits are submitted, so they don't have the ability to reduce it massively in 2025 because many of the applications that are already submitted are working their way through. But if we go down and we click on this, you can see here, this includes both the Temporary Foreign Worker Program and the International Mobility Program and work permits issued under humanitarian public policies. So these are the Ukraine, the Kuwait visas, the Iranian special measure, the Hong Kong special measure. So that's all of those are included in those numbers, the overall. And when you have new announcements of humanitarian and public policies, it will have a direct impact on the number of temporary foreign worker program applications. Now, one of the things people ask is they say, well, Mark, are they actually going to put hard caps on LMIAs? Well, at this stage, we have not seen that they're going to follow the same pattern as the US, like the H-1Bs, and say we're only going to issue so many thousand a year. That's not the case. But if you follow my previous YouTube videos, you will see that one of the things they've done for the temporary foreign worker program just recently is to make it harder and harder to actually submit. So how do you do that? Well, one of the ways that they do that is very simply, they have shifted the median wage, or at least eligibility, for classification as a high wage worker. As a high wage worker, the restrictions for unemployment and areas that where you must target underrepresented groups and things like that, they don't apply to the high wage. They only apply to the low wage. And so if you're in an area where the unemployment rates are 6% or higher, or you're like the number of foreign workers under the temporary foreign worker program that are in your business, if it's higher than 10%, your employer can't even submit the application. So in one fell swoop, it was actually quite brilliant, I'll be honest. I thought that they were just going to increase the prevailing wage rate so high that that employers wouldn't be willing to pay. But instead of that, what they did was they said, yes, you have to increase. If you want to consider your position as a high wage position, then what you have to do is you have to pay this median wage. And I'll just show you very quickly here. I'm going to go over to the temporary foreign worker program, and you guys can pull this stuff up yourself. I'll shift it over here and I'll show you temporary foreign worker program. And why am I saying this? Because, the wrong one. Sorry, I've got the wrong one. Give me 1 second. Here we go. Okay, so if you go here, temporary foreign worker program, I'm going to go into this. I'm going to pull it up, and then I'm just going to very quickly show you what I'm referring to. And why am I talking about this? Because, guys, this is the pathway that some of you, the only pathway that you may have to be able to stay longer in Canada for this whole thing to right the ship. And when I tell you, when you look at the annual levels plans right here, and we will get to these, this is the only figure that I want you to pay attention to, 2025. Because if the Conservative government gets elected next year, then they can completely change this whole thing. So I would not, in a coming election year, pay any attention to 2026 and 2027 for any of these figures. Because if the Conservative Party gets elected, things could be worse. They could decide we're going to adjust and we're not going to place so much emphasis on humanitarian things and we're going to focus more on economics. That's kind of more of a conservative thing to do. But ultimately, the key that you're going to focus on is these numbers right here. And when it comes to permanent residence here, it's 2025 right here. Okay? So that's what you're going to focus on. So why am I talking about high-low wage? Because this may be one of the only pathways that you're able to stay. See if my camera here can stay focused on me. Looks like it's a little blurry. Okay, this is the way. Just zoom this. All right, so if we go here and we look at these, one of the big changes is they've basically said if you want to hire someone in Alberta and you want it to be considered a high wage occupation, then it's $29.50, and it's actually 20% higher than that, which is like $34. So you guys can do the math. But these figures here, it's 20% higher. If you're paying that, then you'd be considered a high wage. So basically what it's done is, and they've indicated itself, for existing foreign workers in Canada right now, how are they going to be reducing? If we go back to the report, and I will show those too. Let's find the right page here. So the question is, how are they going to reduce under the International Mobility Program, or in particular, the Temporary Foreign Worker Program? How are they going to reduce future numbers and keep them down at 82,000? Well, they're doing it this way. They're basically saying there are existing workers in Canada that are on LMIA-based work permits that are under the lower category. They were considered, let's say they were being paid $30 an hour, so they were high wage. Well, if they want to continue to extend their work permit in, say, an area where the unemployment rates are 6% or higher, then they have to be paying them almost $35 an hour. So there's a $5 raise. And that in and of itself is going to result in many employers just being barred from applying for work permits. So that's the first item that I wanted to address, okay, on the temporary resident side. So if we go back here, I want to show you this. And I'm starting with temporary because temporary leads to permanent. And there's a ton of people that are posting comments, and I will absolutely get to those. So guys, please hang in there. But I want to talk about this stuff first so we can kind of set the stage. So temporary foreign workers, these are historical figures. And this is where these knee-jerk reactions just really bother me. Because if the temporary foreign worker program itself was administered properly and it was enforced properly, none of these issues, at least that we see now in terms of their concerns over corruption or exploitation or fraud within the program, would even exist. But this was a conservative problem long before it became a liberal problem, and the conservatives weren't able to figure out a way to really sort it out. I'm not going to get into that. That's a separate discussion, but we will have lots more discussions about this. Look at the bottom line here. See this red line? In 2019, before the pandemic, you can see numbers dipped during the pandemic. And this is the temporary foreign worker program, guys. This is the LMIAs. And then in 2021, 2022, 2023, it basically doubled. Okay, it basically doubled. So going forward, you guys, this is going to be a very, very crazy world. Let's see. It looks like I've got Alicia. She's going to chime in here and join me. So let's shift over and see if I can get Alicia in here with us. Where is Alicia? Okay, 1 second here. Too plain. I think it's this one. Okay, give me 1 second. I'm going to try to pull her in. Okay, Alicia is joining me here as we go through this stuff. All right, how you doing, Alicia?
I'm good. I was sorry I was having to meet with clients, so
Okay, you haven't had your little discussion with CBC yet, I guess.
no.
Okay, well, stay tuned for that. Alicia's going to be offering some thoughts on the house, the CBC radio production. So stay tuned for that. So basically, Alicia, what we're talking about, and I'm going to have to shift around here and just see if we can get, yeah, there we go. Okay, so basically what I'm talking about right now is what's happened with temporary residents. So like I was saying, the temporary foreign worker program has gone from in 2019 to 2023 to 184. But guys, this number is small. This is not a big number. So the extent to which they are announcing all of those changes to the eligibility for LMIAs, like realistically, if their concerns are that there isn't enough housing or that it's putting pressure on the social services in Canada, like this really isn't the issue. But when you look at these figures, what's included in these figures under the International Mobility Program? It's everything else. And what is one of the major contributors to the larger numbers? Yes, you could say there's 300,000 Kuwait, work permits issued. You could say it's the Iranian work permits and the Hong Kong special measures work permits. But the reality is, it's all of you post-grad work permit holders. And so these large numbers that are showing for 2023, and they haven't shown 2024, right, Alicia? Like the numbers are going to be higher up here for 2024. And so these are the things that are operating. And so when they talk about their desire to reduce and to get the International Mobility Program, you can see these numbers dropping. These are the ones that are significant. 285 to 128 to 155. These numbers, and remember, these are new intakes. These are new people coming in, not the ones that are already here. I guess technically, Alicia, maybe if someone was going to be extending a Kuwait work permit, if they chose to do that and open it up, then that could very well affect this. So I don't know personally, Alicia, how they can say our international mobility program is going to be capped at these numbers for 2025. What are they going to do with all of the Kuwait work permit holders? They have expressed some kind of a desire that they're going to, allow them the ability to extend, but maybe they're just not including that in their numbers.
Well,
Maybe
and
it's only new
technically,
people.
yeah, and technically Kuwait is maybe not classified under the International Mobility Program, right? Maybe they're classifying it under humanitarian.
Well, if you look here, Alicia, and you click on this number 4 and you go down, they do include it. So
Okay.
humanitarian public policy and post-grad work permits. So this is where you guys, and once again, I'm just going to reiterate right here. For temporary residents, these are the only numbers you need to pay attention to. Because until the election happens, and let's say the Liberals are successful and they get reelected, or there's another minority government, well, the pressure from the Canadian population, or the perception that there's immigration, a negative sentiment towards immigration, well, they can proceed forward and they can reverse these decisions. They reversed what they had already planned for 2025 to now announce these. So, and if the Conservatives get in, they could make changes that correspond with whatever their policy is. So this is the only number really that I would pay attention to in an upcoming election year is the 2025 levels. So we covered this briefly, Alicia, and now I want to just drop down here and I want to look at two things. So we have our 2025 here, and then if I flip the screen over, this is the 2023, and if I slide over a little bit here to 2025. So what I want to look at just briefly is the changes from this 2025 right here to what they're doing right here. So right off the bat, the one that we've talked about is the reduction from their projected 500 right here to the 395. And we covered this already, and I'm just going to slide over to my solo screen, Alicia, for a second. And then I'm going to pull this up, you guys, here. So remember, this is what we talked about. So in 2025, I dropped to 395, then 380, then 365 in 2027. Alicia, and there's me. Okay, so if we go back here once again to web, okay, so if we look at this, you can see the numbers, when they're lower, it has to come from somewhere. And so you can see this is the one thing, Alicia, I don't know. Maybe you can help me explain this, because I can't. Well, I know I tend to speak politically, and
When you click that little hyperlink, what does it say, Mark?
It says the overall French-speaking. This is spin, Alicia. This is their spin. The overall French-speaking permanent resident admissions outside Quebec indicated here represent the number of admissions required to meet 8.5 for 2025, 9.5, and 10 for 2027 of overall permanent resident admissions that have been set. These targets are for admissions outside Quebec and therefore calculated based on how many admissions within the levels plans would be necessary to meet the targets based on the overall ranges for admission outside Quebec. Once Quebec tables their levels plans, these numbers may require updating. So you can see here, if Quebec decides to take a whole bunch more immigrants, then that could mean that this goes up to 15% or something like that. So it's to keep pace with whatever Quebec does. Now we know Quebec they're not super pro immigration in their policy, so it's unlikely that they would go up. But that's really what they're getting at. So my concern is that this is less about bilingualism across the country and more about politics and this theory or belief that and whatever, Alicia, I know you don't agree with me, but the reality is that more French speakers are more likely to vote liberal than they are conservative in future elections, and that people that are brought in under humanitarian and these special policies will feel beholden to the Liberal Party for how wonderful they are. So those are my my views on this. But to qualify once again, I am very pro humanitarian special measures. I believe us as Canadian citizens, we are very supportive of helping our global neighbors. And I've talked about that in the beginning, Alicia. But the politics, and I'll say one last thing, and then I'll turn it over to you, because it's good that we have this little debate. The freaking Prime Minister, Alicia, spent more time trying to deflect over to Pierre Poilievre in his announcement than addressing what the heck they've actually done and the impact it's going to have on all these people that were sold to a large extent a bill of goods by all of the players in this. And even us, Alicia, when we were meeting with people in 2019, 2020 or whatever, what's the best way of getting PR? Come study, get a work permit, transition to PR. This is the pathway. And then it all changed. Okay.
So here's my counterpoint. My
Yes.
counterpoint is going back to first principles. And if we slide over and we take a look at the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act and Section 3 and the objectives, this is what we're doing. If we were running a business, we would be having an overall, what is our strategy? And basically, that's what this is under the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act. So, the objectives of the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act are kind of the governing mechanism for how we align ourselves in our policy and our
Hmm.
implementation. And
Yes.
really, when we look at that, it says 3 sub 1 sub A to permit Canada to pursue maximum social, cultural, and economic
Hmm.
benefits of immigration.
Yep.
That is our overriding objective. The next thing is to enrich and strengthen the social and cultural fabric of Canadian society while
Yes.
respecting the federal, bilingual, and multicultural character of Canada. That's where a
Absolutely.
lot of the French stuff is coming
Yeah.
in, right?
Yeah. I get it. But to the extent to which they've ramped it up, what has changed since 2002, Alicia? What has changed? We've had, when the act was actually enacted, like these levels are unprecedented.
Hmm.
That's my only concern. And I've seen a lot of the decisions that are being made are so political. And I'm not just talking about the liberals. I'm talking as much about the conservatives and how they're spinning all this crap as well. And I
Well,
wish
and
people would, yeah,
what I would hope is that all parties come back to first principles. We look at why we have the
agreed.
act in the first place, right? We're seeing, so after we're talking about enriching cultural and social fabric, we're also talking about development of minority official languages. Again, that's French. We've got supporting the development of strong and prosperous Canadian economy in which the benefits of immigration are shared across all regions to Canada. We've got family reunification, right? That is one of the major objectives of the act, to promote the successful integration of permanent residents into Canada while recognizing that integration involves mutual obligations. We've got prompt processing, the attainment of immigration goals, which is super important in terms of the delivery. We've got fair and efficient procedures and the integrity of the immigration system, so preventing fraud. We've got facilitating the entry of visitors, students, and temporary workers for trade, commerce, tourism, international understanding, cultural education, and scientific activities to protect public health and safety. Like, I would hope that all parties come back to first principles and say, what is our objective in having immigration levels and policy? And I agree with you, Mark. There is a lot of politicking happening right now.
Oh my goodness. How, Alicia, like I'm just posting the comments and, I value everybody's thoughts on this. Like you said, the reality is, how do we get politics out of immigration? The immigration policy traditionally has been developed. And like I said, once again, I go back to 2014 when Jason Kenney was over ESDC. The reality was there was a series of CBC Go Public articles that came out claiming that foreign workers were taking the jobs of Canadians and that employers were not giving Canadians the opportunities. So what happened? They overhauled the temporary foreign worker program and instituted the vast majority of the policies the liberals are doing right now. So we're just
Mhm.
coming full circle. And then after the election 2015, then the liberals continued to soften. Why? Because employers and the economy and everything was pushing them to do it. So it's easy to look back in hindsight. And I want to reiterate this. Am I fully supportive Conservative Party person? Yes, I am. But the reality is all of this has arrived as a result of a series of events. And the only concern that I have right now is that people are not honest about it. And the conservatives are not honest about it. The liberals are not honest about it. And everybody is solely focused on how do we get the next vote in the election of 2025. And because even these very broad sweeping provisions, they could have been rolled out in a much more measured and managed way. They didn't
Mhm.
have to do the knee jerks that they're doing. But when your political strategists are telling you you've got to make these decisions, politics is number one, and sound immigration policy and what's in the best interest of the country is number two. And I have no doubt that if the conservatives were in power and this was them, they'd be probably doing the same thing that the liberals are. And so, but it just irritates me. The prime minister had an opportunity, and let's face it, he's right in the midst of his own challenge to his leadership. And so, why did they release it October 24th instead of November 1st? Like everything is about, it's about distraction and switching instead of just saying, look, we made some mistakes, and kudos to this guy right here, Alicia, because
Hmm.
he has taken it on the chin for all of the liberals' decisions, over the policy decisions of the last few years. And so do do I like everything that Minister Miller says? He spends a lot of time trying to, a lot of focus on Pierre Poilievre as well. And I know he's good friends with Prime Minister Trudeau as well. But man, he's taken it on the chin and he's owned it, and he's been willing
Hmm.
to take responsibility. So I give him a lot of credit for it. But I just look at how sweeping and the impact that this is going to have on businesses and people and lives, and like, we are not going to fully see the impact of this. One of the things that I haven't yet addressed with everybody is the number of people that are going to choose whether or not to stay in Canada without authorization or go home. And that's a good lead in, Alicia, to our next podcast episode that will be released here. I'm just waiting for the audio to come back from the audio editor for our podcast, and then I'm going to be publishing it later today, the video on the consequences of choosing to stay without authorization in Canada. And you guys have to, if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, you need to do that, because I'm going to release it this afternoon. So yeah, I know, I know I'm kind of passionate. I can't remember, someone said, oh, right, this is my favorite one. Calra says, "Hi, good morning. You look more stressed with this news." Heck yeah. And then and there's other comments that, oh, the consultants and lawyers will be, they'll be out of business now. And that's not the case. That is most definitely not the case. We're definitely not going to be out of business, because what happens when people don't have options, or they don't know what to do, or they're in just desperate times? That's when they book consults with us, right, Alicia? And so we're here to try to support and help people through this, to give them advice that they can actually rely upon, and to not feed them like just this full bowl of lies, but to actually give them information that can help to make good decisions for their future.
Hmm. And it's a balancing act, and circumstances change, and world politics change, and opinions change, and we're seeing all sorts of pushback against immigration, against immigrants in many countries around the world. And I'm hoping that making these changes is based in rationale. They did say they've done a lot of consultation. They said that they are looking at, what's happening, what's happening with housing, what's happening with communities, in order to try to strike a balance that's going to make sense going forward. And at the same time, I agree with you, Mark, when you said, like, I feel for all these people who are here who are having to make these tough choices now, because all these pathways to PR, all these options for staying a little bit longer to get more work experience are coming to a close quite drastically.
Yes. Okay, let's jump back and let's get to the details. So as you can see, once again, these are the projections for 2025 to 2027. Once again, we're focusing on 2025. So the federal economic priorities, this has changed. So you can see no longer last year, if we look at these, what they call this, let me just slide over. So federal high skilled is what they called it, which was effectively express entry. And I'll just slide over here to the two web here. So you can see the change, and I'm going to slide this right over if I can. Okay, there. So you can see this included federal skilled worker, federal skilled trade, and Canadian experience class. And so now what they call this section, they call it includes admissions for eligible candidates with specific skills, training, language ability in order to be responsive to labor market needs. I don't know who could argue with that. Like, realistically, if you're tying it directly to the needs, but oh my goodness, it is so hard to figure that out. And one of the things I've always said, and I'm a firm proponent of, is that the economic side should be pushed more to the provinces for them to make those decisions in terms of what their labor market needs are. And I feel that provinces are in the best position to make those decisions for their own provinces. And I would have liked to have seen more allocation to the PNPs at a greater portion versus the 50-50 that used to be. And then allow the IRCC to do what they do best, the family class, the humanitarian, the refugees. And I'm not saying take it completely away, but I think the provinces are in a better position to decide what they need from an economic standpoint.
Well, so the counterpoint to that, Mark, is that when economists look at long range outcomes for immigrants over time, they have said that we tended to do better when we focused on human capital, when we had generally high human capital, and that our systems rewarded that. And the more that we move towards trying to pick winners and losers in terms of what are the knocks, what are the categories, what are the job vacancies, the more we struggle and the more we can get it wrong. And
Mhm.
so I would prefer that instead of having more emphasis on these targeted draws, we actually stick to having a very competitive CRS based on human capital without having all these skewed factors like for French. When we have just straight human capital
Yep.
and we have something that's predictable under express entry, I think that generally leads to more predictable, transparent outcomes.
Yes. So here's my thought, and I agree with you that human capital is important. But no one is talking about the effect of AI on our labor force. No one is talking about
Mhm.
how the artificial intelligence, which is coming like a tsunami, is going to disrupt our labor market. And
Mhm.
who are some that are going to be affected way more? Like we always thought it's the factory worker that's going to be replaced. It's going to be the lower level skills, like your food counter attendant at McDonald's, which, yes, we see the kiosks there. But nobody is talking about the impact of artificial intelligence on professionals, on high skilled individuals, knowledge based workers. And by and large, knowledge base are the ones that are filling the highest ranks for human capital because they're the ones with the master's degrees and the bachelor's degrees and the skilled work and things like that. So I think traditionally, economists are really good at looking at the past and trying to use that to extrapolate what the future is going to hold. But they have no clue how to deal with artificial intelligence because the industries like the labor market, like, you know, the, it's never and will have been affected by something as rapidly and as widespread as artificial intelligence will have. And
Yeah.
so it'll be interesting to how it plays out. But I agree with you. I agree with you that there is a role for both things. I just feel like the provinces can still have the ability to focus on human capital, which Alicia, they are. You look at
Mhm.
Alberta, the expression of interest system themselves. Sure, they may pick winners and losers, but they're still picking from the highest human capital people. That's the reality.
Yeah.
So,
And
yeah.
And I do agree with you about AI, Mark. And there was actually an interesting New York Times article very recently about AI and the aging workforce and immigration and what's happening with all of these trends. And there is a way for countries and governments to capitalize on this, but it is going to require retraining. It is going to
Yeah.
require the ability to harness AI to make jobs more productive and people more efficient in their jobs and
Yeah.
effective, and to have a different learning set where you can work in tandem with AI rather than having people being fully replaced.
Yes, and that's the key. And there's I can't remember who wrote the article. It was very utopian. It shared, and I'm gonna definitely pull it up and talk about it later as we dive more and more into AI in the world of immigration. Just on all of the technological advances, both from a medical standpoint to feeding the world to curing disease and the role it's going to have to drastically expedite that process. And so those things are so amazing and cool. And it's like the development of the assembly line, right?
Hmm.
And it revolutionized things, and or any kinds of automation. And this is one of the things, Alicia, that I'll get into a list. I'm going to go through. I pulled out kind of some top takeaways from all of this as we just finish and wrap up, showing what these changes are. But there are some interesting things that we can expect to happen as the PR avenues become smaller, as temporary residents are restricted. It's going to have some ripple effects. And those of you who are here, we will absolutely talk about our takeaways on what this means for you and what you're going to do. Okay, let's take a look a little bit further. So once again, I got kind of hung up on the French, and that's fine. Okay, moving on. Okay, so the federal economic priorities, we looked at that. And once again, I want to emphasize how this is broken down. So, so you could see here specific skills, training, language ability in order to be responsive to labor. And then these categories established by the minister in the express entry system. So the 2025 priority categories are these. So you can see healthcare, trade, French are listed. Categories are established each year, informed by labor market information and projections, as well as input received from partners, provinces, territories, and stakeholders and countries. Is there a reason, Alicia, why they just listed this? Like, that's my question. Why is STEM not here?
Yeah.
Like
And
we
so it
know
might be
ag
that
is an
they're
issue.
changing. Yeah.
It could
Yeah.
very
So
well
they might,
be.
yeah.
We know that agriculture is important, but it's not specifically listed here. We know construction is important. It's not specifically listed here. So this is basically the targeted areas that allows the federal government to be responsive, like they said. Now, if you look here and we go down to the next one, because it doesn't say general draws, but if you look at the in Canada focus, what does this mean? It says primarily admissions from the Canadian experience class and other regional immigration pathways, but may also come from federal skilled worker and federal skilled trade. So skilled worker and trade are not out the door. Some people are like, well, does that mean there's not going to be any more trades? Well, we haven't seen a federal skilled trade, So, okay, I guess maybe they're going to, I don't know maybe they're going to do a trade only round. I'm not sure, but this is
Didn't they do
clear.
one yesterday, Mark?
Oh yeah. Did they do a federal skilled trade? I didn't even see.
It wasn't federal skilled, but it was
Oh,
category
okay. I
specific
see.
trades, I
Let's
think.
take a look. Boom, right on the spot.
Yeah, so it was under the trade
Yep. There
occupations
we go.
category
Boom. Yeah.
specific.
1800.
That
That's
happened
fairly
last night.
large. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's fairly large. Yeah, they those little beggars snuck it in there. Okay,
So I
433.
think maybe so what they're doing is saying, well, we're not going to do a full FST draw, but we're going to do a category specific trade occupation draw.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which makes sense because they have so many people here in Canada. And I think I'm just trying to remember here. Is it here temporary? We also had I think they had, yes. Okay. So this is economic immigration right now, and principal applicants and their spouses and or dependents. So you can see 2019 and then up 2023, it's jumped. It has gone up quite a bit. And now these numbers are going to be dropping back down in 2025. But as we go through this, you guys, you can see that when you look at the overall numbers of people that are actually in Canada, and if we go back here to the chart that we were looking at here, these are just foreign workers, okay, and work permit holders.
And
And
the
this
thing
is
that I'd like to
2023. Please,
Yeah,
Alicia. Yeah.
and the thing I'd like to point out, Mark, from the way that the minister framed this also, and in the speaking notes from one of his last speeches, was the reason that we're focusing on CEC draws is because these people are already here. They already
Yes.
have housing, they're already established, they're already working for Canadian employers. And so inviting them for PR makes sense because it's not having additional housing that's required for new immigrants. They're already here, they're already established. And so that's why it makes political and policy and housing sense to have a pathway to PR for this group in Canada as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I know Ayatollah here has been posting lots of comments, and I'd like to pull him up. Yeah, virtue signaling. I'm not quite sure what you mean by that, but this is the perception. This is why this is happening. Okay, so Ayatollah is clearly passionate about his views, and he is an elector. He's a voter. I'm assuming you're a Canadian citizen, and so this kind of information. When people are providing feedback and frustration and anger about the immigration departments, this is real. And I'll never like some people, Ayatollah, would probably not post your comment because they don't like to see what you have to say. But hey, man, I respect your thoughts, and you are completely free. And this is the way the world should be. It shouldn't be that I don't like what you're saying, so I'm not going to give you a voice, or I'm not going to address your concerns, because your concerns are amplified astronomically. And none of this would be happening if more people just like you were not expressing it and it having a real impact on this upcoming election. And then we have other people like Chaitanya here, and I love this. Mark isn't one of those who's after your money. He cares about everyone who has reached out to him and tries whatever he can to help out. Got to reach out to you soon for my next application. Yeah. So, but the reality is with all of this is that it's very polarizing. And what I wish, Alicia, is that people like Ayatollah and people like Chaitanya could come together and find a middle ground where we could talk about these things in a realistic way. Because is immigration important to Canada? Yes, it is. Our population is our birth rates are just not low enough. Now, I'm doing my part, Alicia. I have 4 children, and I know you're doing enough to replace you and your husband, but the reality is the population growth is not sufficient to support long-term. The economists have indicated what our country needs, but what is the right number? And that number in terms of all of this is decided by cabinet. It's decided by the elected party. And through their consultations, through their reliance on whatever sources they rely on, including feedback from stakeholders, they try to find a middle ground. And I think when big swings happen like this, even with the Liberals' decisions to increase exponentially, and you look in 2020, when 2021, I guess it was, when they did that massive CEC draw that wasn't focused on human capital. It was just whoever was here because we just needed to meet the levels for the level's sake. I think that's where it creates, it creates ayatollahs, right?
Well, and what I worry about is when people say that immigration hurts the community, right? Like, and part of it I feel is just maybe people have not spent that much time speaking with immigrants or getting to know people who have gone through immigration, because I think there's a lot of fear and I think there's a lot of misperception out there, um, or kind of viewing immigrants as other. And honestly, unless we've had like about 4,000 years of being in Canada, and few of us have, with the exceptions of Indigenous First Nations, everybody is an immigrant to Canada, really. So it's all a matter of getting to know people, understanding that we are all people and we have something to contribute to community
Yes,
together.
absolutely. Rohan, you have such an angry face. I am so sorry you chose that for your profile. Mark is just trying to cope, LOL. And you know what? I am. that is probably, I'm going to give you one of these. Yeah. I am absolutely trying to cope because whenever these big major decisions are made in broad sweeping impacts, I can't help but think about the individual people that are affected by it. Alicia and I have consultations all the time, every day, with people who are wondering what the future holds for them, who've spent thousands and thousands of dollars, injected it into the Canadian economy to study, and who had a hope of one day becoming a permanent resident to better the lives of themselves, their family, who come to Canada, who bring all of the good that they have with them, all of their knowledge, their skills, their ability, their kindness, their goodness, and make our country a better place. And so, yeah, I'm trying to cope with this because the numbers before they reduced them were massively below what they would have needed to be to have all of the temporary residents transition to PR. And now when you basically reduce them by, what is it, almost 40% or whatever it is, these people are now faced with some real choices. And I can't help but have compassion for people. And so, but here's the thing, Rohan, I can't wait for Pierre to become prime minister. I would love for him to become prime minister, but that's irrespective of the fact that I have unbelievable compassion for these people. And I love what Joey says here. They said we don't need immigrants until they do. And that's so accurate. So I'm so grateful for everybody that's posting posting comments and oh yeah. And some people are just kind of posting almost racist stuff, which I'm not going to post that. If you're going to be an idiot that way, then I won't post your comment. But yeah. And Rohan says we're going to go to Harper levels and just wait for Trump to become president, buddy. And Rohan, I'll leave it at that, my friend. But the reality is there is far more that connects us than separates us. But for whatever reason, these days, people just feel this need. I don't know if it's you get more views or the algorithm picks up your comments more, but boy, there's so much more that binds us together than separates us. And that's kind of what drives my thought process with all of this. All right. Okay, moving forward. Let's see here. Let's just wrap up very quickly our discussion on the levels here. And then I'll make sure I got the right one here. Oh, that's our live. There we go. And last but not least. Okay, so if we go through here, so we've seen now that they've broken it down. So if you look at the overall numbers, so 41,700 federal economic priorities and 82,980 in Canada focus. So Alicia, if we do the math here, we've got federal business, we've got federal economic pilots, Atlantic, provincial nominee. So you can see right here where the number's going. That's the question. So if we look at the overall economic targets of 300 for economic, let's see if we can add these up. My apologies here. So 232,150. So let's look at the projections for 2025 for economic before. So economic 2025, we'll just slide over here a bit. And then we'll go down here, total economic, 301,250. So how much is of the overall economic, how much is being reduced? It's quite sizable. And you know, I don't know if you have any thoughts, Alicia, on this or comments on this. Like, what do you feel? Like, what are your thoughts about all of this? I know I've been kind of rambling a little bit and ranting a little bit, but like, what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on this and the
Well,
significant adjustments here that they've made?
when I first looked at it, it honestly felt to me like, oh, it could have been the Conservatives that were making this move, right? That it feels like the Liberals are doing exactly what they think the public wants. And if the public wants to have reduced overall numbers, then they are reducing overall numbers. I think the proportions are about the same. They did say that the proportions of economic
Yep.
class
We're
immigrants are
still
about the same.
60.
It's
Yep.
about 60 to 61%. So they're still using the same proportions in terms of most immigrants are coming as economic immigrants. And I think that's something that people lose sight of. We hear a lot about humanitarian measures. We hear about a lot
Mm-hmm.
about
Yep.
humanitarian temporary public policies or refugee claimants, but those overall figures are very, very low. And I think that tends to breed a lot of fear when we focus on, well, how much money is the government spending on refugee or economic or humanitarian measures? Well, you know what? 61% is economic immigrants, and they are contributing to the society and to our economy in a way that we would not be able to function if we did not have. And so, just a little bit of perspective in terms of when we look at overall big picture, economic immigration is absolutely key. It is by far what we focus on because that has a self-serving interest. We have an interest as a country to make sure that we are economically profitable. Um, so that's where most things are coming from. And then family reunification. So most of those family reunification numbers, which are pretty big as well, like that's a
Mm-hmm.
significant chunk. But
Yes.
the reason that we have a fairly large family reunification number is that most of the time, people who have a spouse are established in Canada and then they're already permanent residents or citizens and they're bringing over their spouse from overseas or sometimes their child. Um, and most of those people already have integrated into the society. They already have housing. And we have a value in the objectives of the Immigration Act to have family reunification, that we view it as something that's important to be able to bring your family here, your immediate family. It's literally only your spouse and your kids. And we still see those parents and grandparents figures are very low, right? We know that we have an aging population in Canada. And so we understand that people really want to be reunited with their parents and grandparents, but we'll have to see what happens. It's probably still going to be a lottery, Mark. I don't know what'll happen
Yeah.
with those parents and grandparents, but not a lot in overall numbers for that.
Yeah. One thing I want to point out as well for everyone is that as um, as programs are kind of capped in a way, but the intake is not. There's only one natural consequence of that, and the consequence is increased processing times.
Mm-hmm.
So if, say, for spousal sponsorship, which is really, I can't see a world where they would put a cap on the number of spouses that they will, that they will actually overall caps, hard caps per year. Like it's hard to imagine that they would say, well, we're just not accepting any more spousal sponsorship applications. We're going to close it, right? Like that's highly unlikely that they would do that. But whenever you start to shrink that the amount that are being processed each year, and there's a big funnel coming in, it results in processing times going up. So watch for that. If you're looking to sponsor your spouse, don't hesitate. Get the applications in as quickly as you possibly can, but that goes for everything. If you're pondering and wondering, well, should I apply for permanent residence? Do it now. One of the things that I want to point out is the impact that it's going to have on provincial nominee programs. So I just finished saying that I wish they would give more room for the provinces to make decisions, but let's be honest, not all the provinces are on the greatest speaking terms with the feds. And if the provinces and the federal government are not aligned in the things that they're looking for, well, federal government controls immigration. And so they have the ability to make choices on what they feel is in best interest of the country entirely. And so if we look here, 105,500, and then it was going to go down to 110 in 2026, and then 117.5. And actually, I should say it was that much in 2025. It was supposed to go up to 117.5. And so what they've done essentially with the reduction is, if we slide back here, they basically reduced it to 55,000, and that's total for all the provinces. It will be very interesting to see what the Liberal government does with the allocations for 2025 and how they will distribute them. Will it be per capita? Will it be prorated based on the population of the province? Will it be is it just based on where most of the immigrants are? It'll be interesting to see how this adjusts, because when you look at each province, Alicia, this is where I think the biggest impact is going to be, is within the provincial nominee programs and how they're running the programs. We've already seen that every province has more individuals than they can possibly, convert through the existing allocation that they have. And so now they're going to have to make even tougher decisions. And it's not going to be a great world. Now, we know over the last few years, the federal government has ramped up and has increased those numbers fairly substantially to the provinces. So effectively what they're doing, they're reverting back to some extent to the old world where it was, maybe three or 4 years ago before they did a larger increase. So this is, we'll just flip back to our web again here. So this is something to pay attention to. And then, and then ultimately, regularization public policy. When I look at this, includes admissions for clients provided with permanent residence under initiatives focused on those in essential service industries. Like, I don't really know what that means, Alicia. Obviously, they've got something already in mind, but, and then you can see some of these other programs include streams for human rights defenders in need of protection, as well as LGBTQ individuals. And so if we look at 12 here, that's resettled refugees, government assisted, and they've broken these down: resettled refugees, blended visa office, and then private sponsorship. I'm actually quite surprised, Alicia, is quite a large number. So
and I want to note that private sponsorship means that you have a group of at least 5 Canadian citizens or permanent residents who are covering all the financial costs for that family that they're bringing in. So, just keep in mind that this does not mean that resettled refugees privately sponsored has to have a big federal price ticket attached to it as well. So
yeah. All right. Okay. Well, let's just get to a couple questions here, if we can. My goodness, I was scrolling through the feed, and some people either have taken some time off work or I don't know what, but boy, they've got some fast fingers, and they had lots of thoughts and comments, and I probably won't put most of them up because they're not terribly productive, but nothing quite like personal attacks, and that's totally fine. Like, I'm not a snowflake. You can believe or feel however you want. Just to reiterate, for those that apparently must be supporting Pierre Poilievre and feel like I'm a liberal supporter, I'm not. I am a conservative card-carrying member.
I
And
have
but
different political views, but that's okay. We're
yeah,
still
and
friends.
exactly. And Alicia is not. And that's the big issue. That's the big issue that we have to address here is the idiocy that exists in believing that you're either with us or you're against us. And if you're not with us, then you're the enemy. And the conservatives are just as guilty of that as the liberals are. And it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, we're here together. And it requires a lot of different viewpoints coming together to come up with solutions that will work for everybody. And who wants to live in a country that's divided? Who wants to live in a country where people get their jollies off of personal attacks? Like that's not even like, I don't know. Like, but at the end of the day, yeah, people can say, or they need and absolutely have to have the freedom to say what they want. And regardless of how I feel about it, like I value that. That's really important. Even on this channel that I have full control and I could block anybody that I want to, but I'm not going to do that. And I just hope that as people get whatever they have to say off their chests, then at the same time, they actually listen to some of the things that are being said. But I got kind of the sense that they're not mostly listening and just trying to get out their message, which, yeah, it is what it is. Okay, let's jump to a few questions here. Dennis says, aren't 400,000 PR still very high, historically speaking?
And so one of the things I wanted to do was we have two things, right? We have the levels plan and then we have the annual report to Parliament. And so it's important to look at those two things in conjunction because the levels plan is always forward projections of 3 years on a rotating basis. The annual report to Parliament is, and they've actually released that as well, for 2024 at least. We have some of that and it's in the news release links too, but it's going to say what we actually managed to process and what were the numbers that were finally admitted for each fiscal year. And so we want to look at those two things in conjunction because, for example, during the pandemic, we had projections that were much higher, but on the levels plan, we weren't able to bring in the people that we thought we were going to bring in because the world shut down. And so we want to look at what the forward plan is, but we also want to look at what we achieved. And so, yeah, we can for sure look through the years of how many permanent resident numbers we had projected and then how many we actually achieved.
All right, let's jump to the next one. Let's see here. DV says, hi, Mark, thanks for breaking this down for us. How will this change the Mobilité Francophone program?
Yeah, and they've not said, right? They haven't said anything specific with that. We do know that Mobilité Francophone is under the International Mobility Program, and so the caps in terms of the temporary workers will fall under those IMP overall targeted figures.
Okay, next question here. Okay, some of these I'll pull it up because it was a super Elisa, but she says, "What is better if my husband and is in Mexico and he wants to visit his 10-month son, tourist or visit family? We are under maintenance status. Oh, maintain status. Okay, yeah, this is one I will just ring this bell." And I'll encourage you to slide over. There's a link in the description where you can book a consult. But Eliza, it's not something that we can really answer in. You need specific legal advice. Alicia, I don't know if you have any, thoughts about this, because I think what she's trying to say is, how do we describe it? I'm coming for a holiday or I'm coming to visit family, and it's a fair question.
hmm And it's difficult because anybody who's here as a temporary resident has to prove that they have temporary intent and they have to prove that they can support themselves without working and that they have enough savings to do so. And so if you're in a situation where you and your son are in Canada and you only have maintained status and you're in between trying to apply for another work permit, that situation's a little bit precarious because I don't know if you're able to work or not work depending on what kind of status change you're doing. But if your husband's now saying that he's coming to visit you and everybody's in Canada, and depending on how much savings you have and how strong his connections are to Mexico, does he have a business there? Does he have work? Does he have property? These are all factors that immigration is going to look at to see whether they might consider approving his visa, because the more pull factors you have to Canada, the less likely they are to approve a visa for another family member coming over.
Yeah. It's interesting when I look at some of the comments here, Alicia. Okay, I'll pull this one up here. This is Windatar. It said it should be locked at 4% from any one country, and so this is something that some people have said, so that every country has kind of an equal opportunity at coming to Canada. I know the U.S. has that policy in place, and I think that's something that has been discussed, and even by the Liberal Party. And so that's something that I think obviously where are a lot of the immigrants coming from? There's certain demographic regions, and why? Because generally speaking, their human capital from those countries, at least for the purposes of economic immigration, is really high. Countries that have that are bilingual or that have English as a language within their country have a significant advantage when it comes to economic immigration coming. I just had a meeting with a potential investor from China with some of the AI stuff that we're going to be looking at developing. And she talked about the fact that, the vast majority of Chinese, for instance, are, it's not easy for them to get the language scores and score high enough. And so the traditional economic programs like Express Entry, considering there's whatever, 1 billion people, there's not nearly the same level as other countries that come through, largely because of that. And language is a huge, huge part of it.
Yeah, and the other thing is that you also have problems on restrictions. I know there was an article about how difficult it has been
Mm-hmm.
for brilliant people to try to
Yes.
get their immigration, especially in the US. Like people who have like Nobel Prizes and like contributed to like an entire area of like medical discovery or brilliant innovation and are extremely innovative. It's hard
Yep.
for them to get
There's
PR
no path.
because of
Yep.
because of the
Because of
caps.
that is exactly right. And, trying to find that middle ground, right?
Mhm.
Isabella says, what's up with French draws that come in at really low scores? Do you think they are going to continue the trend next year? Well, it's pretty clear, right, Alicia? They've, when they have a specific item right here, right on the levels plan itself, about projections for overall that is increasing when others are decreasing, I think the answer is a pretty clear yes.
Unless it's no longer
Unless,
a liberal government for
true.
past
Yeah.
2025. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, and then Isabel throws out another question. Does Alberta provincial immigration policy, the Alberta Advantage Immigration Program, usually follow the federal level? As in, they can still keep STEM draw in the future? So I think maybe like there's accelerated tech pathway and things like that. But maybe you can just talk just briefly about the distinction between provincial decision making and federal.
Yeah. So provincial nominee programs are completely separate from the federal programs generally, except a lot of the provinces have what are called express entry linked applications. So they'll normally have kind of two buckets of different pathways for permanent residence. One would be express entry linked, meaning that the candidate already has to also have a federal express entry profile and be eligible under CEC or FSW or FST. And then they have specific things like in Alberta, we have Alberta Express Entry linked. And then under that, we have the tech draw. And so, specifically, if you meet a whole bunch of other requirements, then you might be eligible for a tech draw if you have a tech occupation and your employer is in an NAICS code for a tech industry, and if they're willing to give you a job offer and support your application. So, to a certain extent, it can have dovetailing with the express entry stream, but there's also usually non-express entry pathways as well. So there's things that are purely paper-based, and so they're not paper anymore. They're all through separate portals, but there are different streams through the provinces that are not necessarily based on minimum eligibility for express entry federally.
I just realized in the midst of all of this that I actually had a meeting that I just blew right past. This is what happens when the whole world stands still. Um, I'm just going to send a quick to Amazing Prem and see if he can do a little damage control for me there. Okay. All right. Let's keep zipping through. There's a few, actually, there's some really good questions that are also being posted here. So Maraka says, how about the people already submitted their LMIA before the announcement? What's going to happen to their application? Please, can you answer it?
Yeah, and this is a really good question. One question that I absolutely have for myself and a whole bunch of
Mm-hmm.
our corporate clients who have filed their LMIAs 6 months ago and we still don't have a decision. And we don't know. We don't know what's going to happen to these applications that are in process. Um, there's a few scenarios. Best case scenario, they use the rules as they existed up until now. They haven't actually technically implemented the changes until November 8th. So hopefully anything that's getting processed now will be according to current rules. If after November 8th they say, well, this is going to apply across the board, there is going to be massive pain and suffering, because basically nobody's going to be able to comply with that 20% wage hike. And so what it'll mean is that basically you're pushing everybody who thought they were under the high skilled, high wage LMIA stream gets basically bumped down to low skilled because of this artificial 20% bump. And so just like Mark said, for Alberta, the median wage rate is $29.50. And so everything over $29.50 is high skilled. Everything under $29.50 is, low wage. But now that they have this artificial 20% bump, it's adding $5.90. So you have to have a median wage rate of $35.40 in order to be considered in a high wage job. Under high wage job, you have national and scope advertising requirements. But under a low wage job, you have different advertising requirements. You have to be trying to target underrepresented groups, two different types of underrepresented groups. You need to have healthcare, you need to have transportation, you need to show that there's accessible housing under the low wage. And so if they apply this 20% bump and it means that the job falls into a low wage category, basically companies have to start over at ground zero, redo all their advertising and recruitment, and then be willing to offer a 20% bump to a low wage situation, which I don't know. There's a lot of employers who everything is standardized and they want to be within the median wage bracket, and they're not going to give temporary foreign workers 20% more than they give to everybody else. And they're
Yes.
not going to give everybody else a 20% wage bump.
Yeah. Yep. This is an interesting comment from Tony Peterson. He says, you know what it is. They will reduce permanent residents, but will increase illegals with no status. And you know what, Tony, like that is entirely a possibility with this. When people feel trapped and they feel like they have no options, then desperation kicks in. And one of the things that we're doing, and one of the things that I want to highlight is a blog post that Alicia put together on our firm. And if you guys have not yet gone to our firm website, I want to point out that we have a ton of resources there as well to help. And one of them is our blog post. And Alicia and our firm, we actually thought we had another week to finalize it, but we're putting together a more comprehensive blog post on what to do. But essentially, Alicia has put together a couple really, really good articles that I want you to review. How long can I stay in Canada after my work permit expires? And then this is our kind of our flagship, the intro topic entitled Time's Up. And we are releasing through our podcast and otherwise a series on Time's Up, what to do when your Canadian work permit is expiring. And so we'd encourage you to take a look at this. Alicia's got a lot of really good resources within these blog posts. And it's all designed to just help you guys make good decisions, because there's going to have to be some really difficult decisions and some hard decisions going forward. And unfortunately, like Tony has identified here, some people may think that it is in their best interest to actually just stay illegally. And both Alicia and I strongly, strongly encourage you not to do that. And like I said, if you go, and I'll just jump back to our website again, within here, you can also search for the Canadian Immigration Podcast. And in our podcast, like I said, we're going to be, there's going to be an episode, the next one in the Time's Up series is going to be dropping later, probably later today. And in that series, we are discussing the consequences of choosing to stay in Canada without authorization. And also on the YouTube channel, we will be uploading the actual video portion of that. So if you haven't subscribed to the channel, do that. Okay, let's get to a couple more questions, and then we're going to have to shut her down because Alicia and I have a bunch of clients that are needing assistance now. We can see here, this is, and I'll pull up some opinions here. We'll pull up some thoughts from you guys as well, because we value your thoughts. Kunwar says, what the government should be focusing on is the international students with job offer PNP stream, and with more general draws and CEC, remove 50 or any points for LMIA. And I think that's really, there's a lot of information. There's a lot of discussion about the foreign worker program and the corruption and selling of job offers. And even with those 50 points, you guys now, if someone is trying to convince you, oh, pay me $30,000 and I'll get an LMIA for you, understand there's no guarantee that even that those extra 50 points are going to do anything for you, let alone all of the horrible consequences that flow from that illegality. So just be just be aware of that, and follow the YouTube channel, the podcast, the website, because we're going to be releasing a lot of information really fast now, because everything got pushed ahead. I think, like, in all honesty, I think it's this whole leadership thing with the Liberal Party that really pushed a lot of this so that there'd be something else to talk about except by the media, except the turmoil that's happening within the Liberal Party. But the Prime Minister has clearly said he's not going anywhere. So that, according to him, that discussion is over. Okay, let's see what else we have here. Jithan says, hi, what would be the future of STEM or transportation draws? Will they give special priority in CEC or PNP? And I think the answer is we don't know 100% the direction they're going to go. They could change the category-based draws, but they're firmly entrenched in the new plans, firmly. CEC in particular, and PNP is still there. Mm-hmm. Okay. Amol says the Canada have a crisis. They should have reduced immigration more. Well, in hindsight, obviously, the part of the reason they're doing this is they feel like there are, as far as the country and the infrastructure and everything, that there are too many, and that's why they're taking drastic steps to reduce the number of temporary residents and long-term permanent residents. So should they have done something sooner, faster, or not expanded the way they did? Well, it's pretty easy to look back in hindsight and say we should have done this versus this, but I think safe to say probably they shouldn't have.
Well, and also, there was a huge benefit from being able to have that body of workers here while we were recovering from the pandemic as a country. And so some people have said, yeah, this is going to change inflation too, right? So it's all supply demand. There's a whole bunch of factors at play here. And so Canada did have a benefit from having people here who are contributing to the economy, who are filling essential healthcare roles. There were all sorts of things going on, and hindsight is something different than actually being in the moment and having to fight through and figure out what's going on and what's the best way forward.
Yeah. Okay, let's get to let's see here. We've got that one, Jithan Norris. Okay, so Norris here says, will the cut affected those who have already applied for permanent residence and waiting for result?
So generally not. So usually these levels plans are forward projections. And so people who are already in the system, as long as you are eligible for that program and you had a complete and correct application, then your application should be processed. The problem is going to be if people have made mistakes, if people have missed any tiny little thing, there is no mercy. And so that application is going to get returned. And if that happens, then there's very little in terms of future pathways right now for people who had a CRS. If you got an ITA last year or partway through this year, it's going to become a more and more competitive world out there in terms of what the CRS scores are.
Okay, last one was pull up here. This is just a super chat from Marco. He says, the biggest blunder in bringing millions to Canada is the lack of focus on social cohesion, leading to social enclaves, as Jason Kenney noted recently. So I'm assuming Kenney is just having a heyday now, pointing out all of the problems the Liberals have caused that he would have fixed if he was still in power and whatever. But but I do agree with the importance of emphasizing social cohesion, because that has been one of the things that is, I don't think as a country we felt like we're all in this together. And there's individuals that have agendas that, do their very best to push them. And, the success of the country, the vibrancy of the country is the multicultural nature of the country, where all views are respected, and certain ones are not elevated over others, but that everybody's opinion, everybody's thoughts, everybody's beliefs are all taken into consideration. And the very best of everyone is brought forward to make the country better. And maybe that's utopian in me to believe that, but yeah, like Alicia and Alicia, I consider a dear friend, and we do not align always on political issues, but who cares? That's what makes this country so good. And there are times when I say stupid, crazy things and she points it out and I'm like, oh, good point. That was a little off, off base. I tend to be a little passionate, and, there's so many times where I've been speaking in conferences or things like that, and I just have to bite my tongue because it's not my platform, but this is. So sometimes I tend to say things that I probably wouldn't otherwise say if I was speaking at some industry meeting. Yes. Anyways, so
Well,
Alicia is she's my she's my buffer, and yeah, she keeps me aligned.
at the key fundamental value that I think, Mark, you and I are aligned on is the importance of compassion and kindness. And I think one of the things that's happening, especially with social cohesion, is we have less opportunity to engage face to face. And the more we can actually get out there and be in person and look each other in the eyes and have a conversation instead of kind of hurling insults or making comments in a very anonymous platform, like that doesn't really breed understanding at all. But if you sit down and you talk to somebody and you hear their story and what's going on in their life, if you can exhibit some compassion and a real desire to understand a different perspective, there's actually going to be learning on both sides. And so that to me is much more valuable than, saying something witty that's going to be harmful to
Yeah.
somebody else.
Get more views on social media. Let's wrap it up. I'm going to wrap up with just a few of my takeaways, things that I uh, really that I think there's going to be so much more to talk about as this is fully and more comprehensively digested. Obviously went live really quick, but these are just some of the thoughts that I had. So one, just to emphasize, the PR pathway bottlenecks are only going to get worse. So whether that's even lengthier processing times, whether that's even more competition for the spots, express entry, you think the CRS scores that are needed now are high? Well, those are going to go up. Obviously the this whole annual levels plan is just created tremendous uncertainty in policy, and we just don't know what where the Liberals are really at with respect to their immigration policy anymore. There's been a huge shift, obviously, towards tightening of all the areas, and it's going to be even more uncertain if they're in the election. We have a new government next year, so be aware of that, and it pays dividends trying to follow and see where things are going when you're trying to plan long term. Another issue is that if within, say, the foreign worker program, there's a reduction in numbers, or even on the permanent resident side, if workers who are all on open work permits, post-grad work permits, there's no pathway forward and they have to go home. Well, with a shorter labor force, there's only one thing that businesses can do, and that's automate. And so I think there's going to be a huge shift in many businesses towards more automation. Like we're already seeing it, at the fast food franchises, automated tellers, and you walk up and it's like, wow, I don't even talk to a human anymore hardly. It's like I order and it comes up, and when I'll be honest, Alicia, I miss that, and those are jobs that are going to disappear. If companies are unable to fill them, they will figure out new ways to get more done with fewer workers. So I think in some instances it will have a reduction to the actual labor market and the number of positions available, especially for those cohorts that the Liberal government said they're trying to protect, like young people, often get their first entry into the labor market through service industries, and jobs working at the local fast food franchise, or working in the mall, or whatever it might be. And so these are real impacts that are going to take place. And of course the whole political cycle, every time there's an election, and immigration is just so embedded within the whole process, and it's going to be crazy going forward, unfortunately. And I'll be honest, I would love for I'd love for the minister to come join us on here and talk about what they're really thinking about. I'd love for, the conservative critic or someone from the Conservative Party to come and talk, or the NDP or whoever. I'd love for them to come and just have some open conversations. And it's so hard when the only thing that's released is these highly curated, media articles and scripted statements. And I get it. You don't want someone necessarily talking off the cuff, but you need to have both toe your party line. But I'd love to see what they really feel. And, I'm sure that there's many of the liberals that just feel terrible about the decisions they're having to make. And I imagine there's many conservatives that feel the same way about, all these people. They're, good people, friends, and things that may not be able to stay, and that you want in your constituency, that are contributing in your community, that are good citizens. They may not be a Canadian citizen, but they're involved in volunteering and all these kinds of things. I know I run a free English class here on Wednesday evenings in Lethbridge, and we've got a great group of people that are attending, learning English at a very basic level. And yeah, so that's when I think about some of the things that are going on, those are some that come up. So I'll give you a kind of like a little bit of a quick rundown of some of the tips that I'll give for foreign workers in particular. So one, if you have an option for PR, apply now. Apply early. Don't hesitate. Still look to the PNPs, because at least if you're in the province and you're targeting PNPs, you'll always have as a backup the federal programs. So if you have options through PNPs, or you have multiple options, whatever it might be, do everything if you can, and then let it sort out after. Everything you can do. We've seen healthcare, emphasis on healthcare and trades, and I can't remember the other areas specifically that were addressed. I haven't had a chance to go through the whole levels plan, but agriculture, tech, those areas are still going to be prioritized to some extent. And so if you have choices, and try to stay in those high demand sectors, and look at the provinces, look rural. Like rural is going to be it's going to have avenues and potential options that are available that may not be available otherwise, especially in the world of temporary foreign worker program, where typically in rural communities, the unemployment rates are not as high. And obviously the simple stuff, keep improving your language, learn French, build relationships with your employers. If you are an awesome employee and you've really built a solid foundation with them, and they value you and they feel like they can't live without you, you're going to have a far greater shot at them going the extra mile. And I had a consult just yesterday with someone who the employer agreed to give them pretty much a 20% raise, so that they could go through and get an LMIA, and were willing to adjust almost to a large extent, it was through the OINP, adjust their whole labor force up just in order to keep that one person. Can you imagine that? So all the other 3 Canadians that were also doing a similar job all got that raise because they wanted to keep that one person. So, and once again, look for regional programs, like Alberta has a rural renewal stream, and yes, there's the expression of interest on top of it all, but be aware, try to pursue those. Don't fall out of status. Avoid gaps in your status. If you have to switch to a visitor status, that's better than becoming illegal. Do what you can to strengthen your educational credentials. Obviously, when you're in school and you're studying, and there's usually a pathway, study, work, and it's hard to kind of go back, but anything that you can do to make yourself more marketable, and then monitor the policy changes. Stay on top of it. The fact that you're watching this right now is really important. It's really good, because with knowledge comes power, control and ability to make good decisions, and not just accept whatever someone's telling you. Be informed. And I can't help but put out there, if you have questions and you're uncertain what to do, that's why Alicia and I are here. We do this. Yes, this is our business. This is our income. This is how we support our families. This is our profession. This is what we love. But the ability to give strategic legal advice is what we focus on. And you can easily do that by clicking on the link, and you can book a consult with us. And in the short period of time, we can help to break down all of this crazy uncertainty and help you to understand exactly where you sit. And in some instances, our advice may be, you need to prepare to go home. And we're not, that's something that we are prepared to tell you. Not, let's apply for this obscure PR pathway. It'll just cost you X dollars so that we can line our pockets with money. That is not how we operate. My goodness, Alicia and I would have been doing something completely different than we're doing now. So those are my final comments, and I appreciate everybody that's tuned in. Alicia, do you have any last minute comments before we wrap this up?
Well, just like you said, Mark, it's so important to, and I think somebody had commented that we seem to have more changes in immigration all the time than anybody else, and it's really difficult to follow. I completely agree, and it's so important to stay up to date on everything because it feels like literally every week there's significant changes being announced, and I do worry a little bit about businesses because it is very unpredictable and it's not transparent, and so when they're implementing things with no warning like this, it is going to have an effect on companies and existing employees. So I would hope that Canada can come back to first principles to say, look, here's our policy, here's how we're going to roll it out, so that people actually have some certainty and they can plan their lives and their jobs.
Absolutely. All right, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. There will definitely be a whole lot more discussion about this, but we wish you all the best as you try to